Well, good day to you all. I hope I'm finding you doing well. We're getting back to our study in the Gospel of John today. And it's been a few days since we have done this, but we are in John chapter 5. So if you can join me, that would be wonderful. So let's pick up at John 5, verse 1. It says, "After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool in Aramaic called Bethesda, which has 5 roofed colonnades. In these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time, he said to the man, 'Do you want to be healed?'" Now, it's kind of almost an odd kind of question. If you've been an invalid for 38 years, you would think that you would want to be healed. But maybe Jesus wanted to get his attention, or it is possible that sometimes when people have been in a particular state of need for a long time, they get used to that. And maybe they like people taking care of them. We don't really know why Jesus asked, "Do you want to be healed?" But Jesus was putting it right to him. And the sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred, and while I am going, another steps down before me." I need to lay the background just a little bit here. This pool at Bethesda was not a Jewish place. It was a pagan place, and there was a pagan belief here apparently that every once in a while an angel would come down and stir up the water, and the first one in got healed. That doesn't sound like a God thing at all, but that verse is in the King James Bible, but it is not in modern translations other than as a footnote, because it is that verse is not found about the angel coming down and stirring up the water, and the first one jumps in, gets healed. That verse is not in our oldest, most reliable manuscripts from the Gospel of John. King James is based upon manuscripts that only go back to about 1000 AD. That's 1,000 years after Christ. Since then, since the King James Bible was written, we have found manuscripts, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and many more like that take the manuscripts of the New Testament all the way back to the 2nd century, if not to the 1st century, and they come very close to the original. So the oldest manuscripts do not have that Bible verse about an angel coming down and stirring up the water. So you would ask, well, why would that have been put into the Bible at a later date? Well, probably because that was the belief at that time. And John didn't see fit, apparently, to put that information in the text, but others knew that that was a pagan belief. It was superstition that an angel would stir the water and the first one in got healed. The Bible records information sometimes without confirming that it's true. The Bible simply states historical facts. And this is kind of one of those things where Jesus came to this place of pagan superstition, and he healed a man that had been an invalid there for 38 years, a really, really long time. And, the question may be asked, why didn't Jesus heal everyone there? Well, we don't really know the answer to that. We just know that the Lord knows what he's doing. And even some of us. Some of you may know the story of Johnny, the lady that paints with her mouth because apparently she jumped into a pool of water at some time in her life and hit the bottom and was paralyzed. And as a result, began to really serve Christ. She acknowledges that if she'd been left whole, that her life would not have been what it became. And she had great influence because of her disabilities, great disabilities. And yet she had great influence and God used her. So we never know why God heals some, but doesn't heal others. But the reality is that we know that he does heal some. We not only read it in the scriptures, but it happens in real life. So Jesus asked the man, do you want to be healed? And the man says, there's no one to help me into the water when it's stirred up. And apparently, some people believe that these were natural hot springs, and that every once in a while there'd be a flood of water that would come through, and the water would stir up. And there was the pagan belief or superstition that if you jumped in first, you got healed. But the man says that no one helps me get in the water. So Jesus said to him, get up, take your bed or your mat, and walk. And at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and walked. So it's a wonderful thing that God is more powerful than pagan superstitions. And in this case, Jesus chose to heal this man, and he got up and walked. Now it goes on to say, now that day was the Sabbath. So the Jews, he's referring to the religious leaders, so the Jews said to the man who had been healed, it's the Sabbath. It's not lawful for you to take up your bed. Can you imagine this man that had been there 38 years, picks up his bed and walks, because that's what Jesus told him to do. But the Jews, the religious leaders, are so stuck on their religion, they're not concerned about the man being healed. They're only concerned about him breaking one of their laws. By the way, he was not really breaking the Sabbath law of the Bible. The Jews had built up a big system around what it means to work and not work on the Sabbath. The Bible tells us that the Sabbath is a day of rest, and that we are to cease. In other words, we're to have a day of rejuvenation for our bodies and our minds, a day for family, a day for worship. But the Jews were more concerned about him breaking their rules. And he wasn't breaking God's rules, but they had interpreted what work meant. And they had a list of 38 things that you could not do. And to carry something was one of those. But the Bible never taught that. So they said to him, it's the Sabbath. It's not lawful for you to take up your bed. But the man who was healed answered them that man, the man who healed me, that man said to me, take up your bed and walk. In other words, he's talking about Jesus, though he did not know who Jesus was. And they asked him, who is the man who said to you, take up your bed and walk? Now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, as there was a crowd in the place. In other words, Jesus wasn't looking for attention. He just kind of subtly snuck in and healed the man and left. And afterwards, Jesus found that man in the temple. And so, in other words, when Jesus found him in the temple, the word that's used here indicates that really Jesus was looking for him. It was part of the Jewish religion that if God healed you, you went to the temple and you told the priest and you made sacrifice to God. Well, Jesus knew he would be there, so Jesus went looking for him. And it says, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, see, you are well. Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you. And the man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had healed him. Now, when Jesus said, don't sin anymore, he wasn't indicating that the reason why the man was an invalid was because he had sinned. He simply was acknowledging that that sin really can have an impact upon our lives, and we can't say that all sickness is from God, because it isn't. But it does say here, he says, sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you. In other words, Jesus is addressing the fact that he's obviously participating in these superstitious practices. Jesus is saying, I've healed you, but go and sin no more, or something worse can happen to you. And he's probably referring to hell. He's probably referring to the fact that there's something worse than being an invalid for 38 years. That The worse is hell. And he's simply saying, live for God. Don't indulge your flesh. Don't any longer be living in a superstitious lifestyle. That it is God who has healed you. Honor God with your life. And so we have a couple of things here that we really studied here today. The Jewish religious leaders were legalist, whereas God is gracious. That God never meant for the Sabbath or any of the laws of God to be burdensome. They are not. They are simply God's way of saying, this is how life works. I want you to live in reverence of me, and I want you to live according to the commandments in which I have created. But often religious leaders will turn these good commandments from God into something that becomes quite burdensome. But we all know that we're saved by grace, not by how good we are. And Jesus wanted the man to know that, hey, you've been healed now. Go live for God. Don't live such a life that you end up in hell. So it's really quite a story. And we don't really have enough time to go into it more than that. So God bless you. It's good to be with you today. And I pray that you would always look to God, that you would never see his commandments as burdensome. But God's commandments are life. They are meant to help us be all that God wants us to be. Bless you.